Yes. Now we are recording. Excuse me. This week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim. Mishpatim, it comes right after the giving of the Torah. Last week, we learned in Parshat Yitro about the giving of the Torah. God gave the Torah. And here it tells us details of the Torah that were given. At Mount Sinai, we didn't just get the 10 commandments. Eventually, we got the whole entire Torah with all the laws. And here's some of the examples. Here are some of the examples of details of laws that God gave us at Mount Sinai. So the first law that it starts off with, strangely, is the law about slaves. Slaves in the time of the Torah, in the time of the Holy Temple, it was permissible to have a slave. You could have a Jewish slave. You have a person that got into debt, he couldn't pay his debts off, or he stole money, it was a punishment he had to pay, and he couldn't make remuneration, so the court had a right to sell him, and sometimes also a person, if he was poor, as he could sell himself as a slave, could sell himself for 6 years, whatever. So that was a law of a slave. So there was three types of slaves. There was what's called there was an Eved Kanani, there was a Shifcha Kananit, and there was an Eved Ivri. I guess you could say there was four. There was Amma Ivriya. There was a Jewish slave, male or female, Jewish slave. That would be a Jewish person that he sold himself, or the court sold him. Sometimes also a Jewish woman, her father could sell her into slavery only for a short amount of time. And there were very strict laws, by the way, how a slave had to be treated. In some ways, it says that a person that bought a slave, he really bought a master for himself, because the slave had to get fed the best food, and you couldn't beat the slave, and if you damaged the slave would go free. And we very, very strict laws about how a slave it can be dealt with. In fact, it says that especially a non-Jewish slave, it was better. I'm sorry, a Jewish slave. It was better for a slave and for a person to be a slave than not, because his worries were basically over. All he had to do was just his job. I'm sorry, a non-Jewish slave, a Kanani, that it was better for him to be a slave than to be free. You couldn't free him against his will. You had to free him, and had to be in front of him. You had to see that he was. Excuse me. Okay, what does this law have to do with us? We know that the Torah is eternal. It's eternal. And it is relevant to each and every Jew, especially, and to a certain degree to every single human being in the world. Because the essence of life is to live according to values. But a person has values. Excuse me. Excuse me, honesty and etc. And so here we have another value is serving God, especially by the Jewish people. The Jewish people have an obligation and also an inner motivation, every Jew, to be a servant of God. Every single Jew, without any exception. Every Jew wants to serve the creator of the universe, to be partners with the creator of the universe, to be a soldier of the creator of the universe, to be a son of the creator of the universe. That's mentioned also in the book, the Psalm of Psalms, the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. So every single Jew wants deep down inside, at least bare minimum, wants deep down inside to be a servant of the creator of the universe. So this is really relevant to every single servant, every single Jew. And the only way a Jew can really be a servant of God is by Moses. There has to be in every generation a Moses that makes the Jewish people, arouses in them this desire that they have that makes them Jewish, that they want to serve the creator of the universe. That's what we believe. That's the essence of Judaism. That's why Judaism was begun by a man called Abraham. If you look in the Bible, you don't see that Abraham did any miracles or promised the world to come or did any spiritual, occult, or mystical things. But Abraham, his whole thing was he was a servant of the creator of the universe. That's what he brought into the world. And all we are the offspring of Abraham, to be servants of God. What does it mean to be servant? What does a servant do? A servant does whatever his master wants him to. He knows that he makes his master happy, more than happy. Especially if he has a good master. Nothing more fulfilling than to be a servant of the king. Okay, let's go. King of the universe. Elu mishpatim, these are the laws. This is how this week's Torah portion starts off. Elu mishpatim, these are the laws asher tasim lifneihem, that you should put before them. God is speaking to Moshe. And these are the laws that you should put in front of them. Right? Moshe is on Mount Sinai, he's getting all the Torah. God says, go down. Eventually you'll go down. You give them the 10 commandments, and then you'll tell them all these laws. Tell them all these laws. What are the laws? We'll see. Elu mishpatim, these are the laws that you should put in front of them. Ti tikneh, when you purchase Eved Ivri, a slave. Okay, now at first glance, it's very, when you buy a servant, but in Hebrew, sometimes the word you can mean plural, also in English. But when in Hebrew it's used plural, it's a different, how do you say, conjugation? What do they call it? It should say tiknu. When you plural, God is saying to Moses, these are the laws that you should put in front of them. And he should say, when you plural. Or he should say, ki tikneh, when, if you want to say, ki echad tikneh, if one person buys. But this is not the proper language. It should say, ki tiknu Eved Ivri. When you buy Tzorach Lav, we should understand, lifneihem, when it says lifneihem, these are the laws you should put before them. Mashma implies Lashon Rabim, plural. The ki tikneh, when it says when you buy, Moshe is speaking to all of the Jewish people, right? There's like 3 million people. Moshe is speaking to them. Ki tiknu. It says that's Lashon Yachid. This is, should say ki, or could say ki tiknu, ki yiknu. Right? When they buy. So it should be plural. This is plural, it's plural. Moshe is speaking to everybody. What does it mean singular? So the answer is, okay, that's question number 2. Question number 1 is, what does this relate to us? I mean, nowadays there is no servants. You can't buy a Jewish servant. A person can't sell himself. The answer is like this. The ki tikneh, when God says, when you buy, this is referring to Moshe. And it refers to what it said before, Hainu mashagatu ve'elu mishpatim asher tasim. These are the laws that you, Moshe, should put in front of them. And what are the laws that you should put in front of them? Right? That's going to be talked about later. Now here we've got another thing. Key, when you purchase a Jewish servant, when you, Moshe, purchase a Jewish servant, what does it mean, Moshe? Only spoken to Moshe? Moshe is the only one that buys a Jewish servant? No, we're going to talk about even nowadays. There has to be a Moses in every generation, and Moses is the one that inspires every Jew to be a Jewish servant of God. It's like this. That refers to motion, it refers to what's above it. Elu mishpatim, that you should put in front of them. Moshe Rabbeinu, alav shalom, Moses, davka yasim mishpatim, he should put these laws before the Jews. And how does he put the laws before the Jews? Al yadei, by means of tikneh eved ivri. When you, Moses, he is the one that has to buy, he is the one that has to purchase the Jewish servant. Okay, what's this mean? The Rebbe is going to explain to us what is the job of Moses in every generation. Every generation has to have a Moses. It's very interesting. You look at the Jewish people, look at the story of the Bible. It's really quite a shameful story. I mean, in a way, if you think about it. These Jewish people are all in Egypt, and they have absolutely no way of getting out. Comes along Moses, and Moses takes them out. He goes into Paro, he fights for the Jews, he takes them all out of Egypt, and they're constantly complaining against Moses. Moses is trying to push them to go further and to leave Egypt, and they don't want to go, they want to go back, and then to receive the Torah, and then they say, Moses, we can't receive it, you receive it for us. And then when they receive the Torah, we'll see in a couple of weeks that the Jewish people, they worship the golden calf. They're always making trouble for Moses. Why? What type of a story is this? Why is the story? And not only that, if you look at the Bible, very interesting thing. We talked about this a lot of times. In the Bible, the Jewish Bible, what's this? It doesn't promise heaven or hell. It's like there is such a thing in Judaism, but it's totally not stressed. So it's not that surprising that the Jewish people would go against Moses. I mean, what did he promise them? What's he promise? What does exactly Moses want? So the answer is Moses wants them to be servants of God. That's what Moses wants. Without any thinking about promises, that's to be a servant. Moshe Rabbeinu, alav shalom, he is the one that puts it in front of him. Okay, why? Why is it that the Jewish people are always rebelling against Moses? Why does there have to be a Moses at all? Why can't the Jewish people just, on their own, just let them do what they want? So the answer is very simple. The same reason people go, let's say, to school to learn how to play, to be a doctor, to be a lawyer. Nobody is naturally a doctor. Maybe once in a while you find somebody. And that you have to learn how to be a person naturally comes out usually like an animal. Usually. Very egotistical, very selfish. That's the way people are. And the Rebbe is going to say that's the way God created them. India is like this. Zorati at Beis Yisrael, zera adam, zera behema. I made the Jewish people to be like the seed of man and the seed of an animal. There's two different levels, different types of Jewish souls. The first one is Haneshamos Hagavos, the high souls. The Milo Madrega, they are very high. Hemanikram, they are called Zera Adam. They are called the seed of man. What does it mean? Shehem Haneshamos Shenim Shecham Bechinas Adam Elyon. They're drawn from this level of the upper man that's on the throne. Isaiah saw a vision of the upper man sitting on a throne. And this upper man says this is what's called the 10 aspects of godliness in the world of Atzilut. And the throne is the world of Bria. That's a lower dimension. So it says on this throne is sitting man. When it says that we are created in the image of God, what does it mean, the image of God? It means this, if you want to call it spiritual, pure awareness of God, which is the man sitting on the throne. That's what it's called. It's a spiritual thing. And it says, that's what it says. Let us make man in our image and our form. Namely, neshamas ta'atzilus. These are what's called the souls of Atzilut. These are the big tzaddikim. They're called banim. They're called sons of God. Which is not the case. The souls, Jewish souls, which are lower, they are called servants. That's what it means. Or like you should treat us, God, either like sons or like servants. If you don't treat us like sons, at least treat us like servants. Hainu, namely, kamo shamalas adam sheish lo dat, like the person that has dat. Dat. What does dat mean? Dat means a feeling of something that's above you, a feeling that's of values. There are certain people. Animals don't have any values. They don't have any values. People can have values. People can have values. Jews. Why? First of all, why do people have values? Because their conscience tells them they have some sort of a sense of something that's above just day-to-day life, right? They have a chance they can make a lot of money, but it means stealing. So they say, no, I'm not going to steal, right? Because you're going to get caught. Could be, but maybe not. Could be, maybe I'm just doing it for truth. I just don't want to steal. I just want to be honest. There's such a thing as being just pure honest for honest's sake. Unlike the psychiatrists and the psychiatrist Freud and these people, they say everything is selfish. There's sometimes people can live for real, true values. An animal has no real, true values. An animal is not willing to, go against his nature. If it's the nature of an animal to save another animal, they don't do it. But to go against animals don't go against their nature for the sake of a higher values. There's no such thing. But people do. People can go against. Okay, now here by the Jewish people, it's a little bit different than everybody else. The Jewish people, their value is to serve God, to serve the creator of the universe. But there's some people that just don't feel this. They don't feel this. They feel like an animal, just like an animal that is simply lacking this value, doesn't feel his conscience doesn't bother him if he drives his car on Shabbat. Just doesn't bother him. Right? There's no feeling whatsoever. Like an animal doesn't feel any. Says that's the Jewish people. That God purposely created the Jewish people in these two different levels. Jewish people that are really sensitive and they really feel the truth that God is creating us. There's nothing except for God, and He's creating us all the time. He's infinitely real, and He creates all the angels, and He creates all this. And this God is very important to Him, what we do. It's a whole different level of conscience. Hainu, kamosha malas adam, just like there's people. Sheyesh lo dat, a person has what's called dat. He can attach himself to certain values. Kach elo and neshamas, also these souls, yesh lam dat, gadol belokut. There's these Jewish souls that they have dat, great in godliness. In other words, you can have a Jewish person that he goes according to his conscience and he's a good person, and he's a this, but what God says doesn't move him at all. Right? When Shabbat comes along, Yom Kippur, sometimes these people, Yom Kippur comes along and they feel, wow, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to fast. But they go hear the shofar sounded on Rosh Hashanah, right? And they hear it sounded. That arouses them a little bit. But generally speaking, they have absolutely no feeling about what God wants, or even that there is such a thing that God exists and that He wants them. O perish, dat, when it says, when it means this word dat, that there are certain Jewish people, which is the 99.999% of the Jews, that they lack this dat of Hashem. They lack this feeling, connection. It doesn't mean dat, yediyah, intellectually knowing. Ella bechinas hargasha means feeling. Mamash kamoshi yitbar, like we're going to explain. So some people, Jewish people, that they feel God, and some people that they don't. That's one type. One type, there's Jews that they feel God. That's like the big tzaddikim. The other type of Jews, this is what's called zera behema. That's what's called the seed of animal. Hainu neshamas the bria. These are lower souls of bria yitzir and asiya. She'em kimat kol neshamas, which are like all of the souls in our generation. Neshamot atzilut, because these souls of atzilut, these tzaddikim, they are Bnei Aliyah, these are high people like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai or something, and they are very, very few. Even in the beginning generations, even in Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's generation, he was a unique. They haven't got such a feeling of godliness. Now, every single Jew, somehow or other, has a feeling of Judaism. Every Jew, I mean, if he knows he's Jewish, it could be that he doesn't know. Because his mother didn't know and his grandmother didn't know. But as soon as he finds out, then there's something strange starts brewing up inside of it. Right? What does it mean I'm a Jew? What is that? Right? You go and tell a person, 5 generations ago, your parents were Japanese. Okay. Your parents were Scottish. Well, very nice. Polish. Okay, that makes no difference to him whatsoever. He speaks Polish. No, he can go back to see my house. No, he can't. But he's not Polish anymore. He's not Scottish anymore. A Jew, we have 2,000 years. The Jews have not have their own home. They've been wandering around the world. You tell a person, it could be 4 generations. The person, his grandfather's great-grandfather, they didn't know they were Jewish. All of a sudden, you're Jewish. Oh, pops up inside is Jewish. Right? What does it mean to him? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. But he can't get it out of his mind. He's a Jew. Right? Are you Jewish? Well, I guess you can say, I'm not a religious Jew. I'm not an observant Jew. I'm not a conscious Jew. There are Jews that every Jew has a certain awareness of God, but there are certain Jews that they have a tremendous awareness of God, just like you and me have an awareness of ourselves. Every person is aware of themselves, right? You're aware of yourself. You know that you exist. You don't want to lose your wallet. You don't want to lose everybody knows they exist. It's simple things. You don't have to prove it to me that I exist. You feel it. It's an obvious thing, most obvious thing in the world. Well, there's also Jews that you don't have to prove to them that God exists. They feel the Creator more than they feel themselves. They feel that themselves are just this miraculous creation by God. That's what's called the seed of man. But most Jews, that's what's called the seed of animal. What does it mean, seed of animal? That it doesn't mean that they haven't got any intelligence or any understanding in godliness. No. Even though that they have understanding of God. And it could be a big rabbi. And they learn Chassidut. And they know Kabbalah. They understand high things about God. From books, and from authors of books. Right? They went and they listened to the Rebbe of Lubavitch speak. They saw him speak. They saw the Sofrim, Hasaga v'Havana Gadol, they have a tremendous awareness of God. How it is that God enlivens the world, how God creates the world, and that they know how great God is. It's not felt by them. So we're not talking about the difference between religious and non-religious Jews. Here the Rebbe is speaking, who reads these things anyway? What non-religious Jews read this? This is written for religious Jews. These are written for Hasidim of the Rebbe. These are written for people who they know Gemara and they know Talmud and they know Kabbalah and they do all of the commandments and they do everything. And nevertheless, as far as feeling goes, they're called the seed of animal because they don't really feel godliness in their soul like they feel themselves. And therefore they're called a behema. That's why they're called animals. Shebehema yesh lo ria, an animal. It sees, it hears. Rak she'en lo das. It just hasn't got any feeling of any values. It only has feeling of what is relevant directly to itself. Also, there's people like this, which is 99.99% of the Jews. They don't have this feeling, awareness, certainty of God. Because this feeling of dat, this is what's called feeling. That's why the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's called the tree of knowledge. Dat means all of a sudden when man ate from it, he started to feel himself. Before that, the first man, he only felt God. He felt God. He felt that there's a creator, and he felt so grateful to be created, and so happy. Every moment is brand new, is fresh, exciting. Every single instant is a big mystery and a big miracle. right? Every instant. As soon as Adam ate from the tree, so all of a sudden, all the mystery and all the wonder and the love and everything, it left. All he felt was himself. That's what it means. What do you feel? A person feels only himself, or he feels also that God is creating myself. That's what it means, that these people, which are called the seed of animal, they have no feeling in God, even though they understand Kisha Haskala, Niksheris, and Nikvas Benafsho, Keilu Margish. If a person, even he thinks about God and he puts his mind into God, it's as though he feels it. But the fact of the matter is, it says, Adam, what is that supposed to be? Adam yada et chava. It says that man, that he knew his wife and they had children. It's a joining. Similarly, it says, from my flesh I grasp God. You can actually grasp and feel as though you see godliness. And nevertheless, it's impossible, even though that it's impossible to really see God with a physical eye, even though it says in the future we will see. Even though nowadays we can't see God with our physical eyes, it says in Matan Torah they did. Nevertheless, just like everybody feels that they're alive. No one has ever seen life. What keeps a person alive is soul. But when a person's soul leaves, then he's dead. Everybody has a soul. The soul is the most intimate, real thing about him. But nobody's ever seen it. You never saw the soul. No one saw the soul. What exactly is a soul? How it works, where it comes from. Nevertheless, it's felt. Everybody feels it. A person can see that he's alive. Shehu nefesh, which is his soul. So you see your hand moves. You see that your eyes work. Kasher yishan, a person when he's asleep, mistalech goes away his life. Kasher near, when he wakes up, comes back to him again. Now this is what's called the seed of animal. In other words, everybody knows and feels and is certain that they're alive, right? Well, the big tzaddikim, the seed of man, they know and they feel and they are certain that God exists, that God creates them. Even more, it's not even that God exists, that God creates all existence. This is incomprehensible, but it's a thing that a person can feel. It's just the same way as we feel our soul, we feel that we are alive. The chayot and nefesh, the life of our soul, similarly is similarly, there are people just like me and you feel ourselves. We know that we exist. There's people that they know and they feel 100% that God exists, and even more, because God's existence is not depending on anything. It's absolutely real. It's above time. God creates time. God creates existence. God creates consciousness. Well, there's some people that are aware. They feel this feeling of God. These are what's called the souls of Atzilut. There's 4 spiritual worlds and the 4 spiritual dimensions, if you want to call it. The highest of them is what's called Atzilut. Like Job said, from my flesh I grasp God. Huli. Job was not Jewish. Even though even though there's no thought that can grasp God at all, namely God's essence is not. But you can know that you don't know, maybe you can't know what God is, but you can know that God is. Noda v'nirgash anuroim, we can see sha'olamot shehem komo guf gadol hem chayim v'kaimim. We can see, let's take an example from us. Right? How do you know God exists? It says, well, it takes a certain amount of faith. But on the other hand, if you do have this faith, is you can sort of feel it. I mean, it's sort of, logical. Here, what's keeping the world alive? You could say, well, nature is keeping it. Could be. It's just nature. It's just this, how do you say, impersonal force that's keeping the world alive. That's like what the Eastern religions say. Could be. But on the other hand, maybe we can say that it's God. right? Maybe it's God. Maybe God is keeping the world alive. God really cares about everything. God. So it says, what keeps the world alive? Either we can say it's nature or some force of nature, or maybe we can say that it's God, that God is keeping the world. So if you look at the world and think it's God, then it becomes pretty amazing. Then you can start to understand what King David said, how great are your deeds, God, how wondrous. This is Mein Sof Baruch Hu, Shofea Bahem, Bakol Rega. Right? How is this tree keep being kept alive? How? As well, either you can say it's a natural process, or you can say that the natural process itself is an amazing miracle. Right? This life force, nobody knows what life is. There's a cat walking around. How does this thing get alive? It's really quite amazing. So if we look at it, and we also have faith that it's God that's creating it, then everything becomes very, very amazing, very interesting. So in other words, you can feel it, but you can feel it intellectually. But when a person feels in his soul, he feels God just like, what's going on? Oh. Just like he feels himself. That's a different story. Mamish. When he feels, here we're seeing you can extrapolate, you can see the world is alive, the sun is in the sky. God is creating everything. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing, right? So he says that, but that's only feeling your intellect. You feel the idea. You don't feel the fact. You don't feel the fact, right? God is creating everything, yeah, but it could be also nature is creating it. It could be. A tzaddik is a person that there's no could be nature. He feels that everything is being created by the creator of the universe, and the nature itself is being created by the creator. He feels it. That's called dat. That's what's called da'at. That's what's attachment. It says, on this it says, who is a wise man, one who sees what is born, like he sees with his eyes. He sees and feels the world is being created every instant brand new by God, not just believing. Me and you believe. One of the ways we do believe is that when we see that there's Rebbes and there's big tzaddikim that they really do feel, and you know that they're not faking it. So you know they feel something. Maybe I don't. It's like a deaf man that goes, a tone deaf man that goes into a concert. So he sees everybody is swooning and they're all going wild. People are crying and fainting. He doesn't have any idea what's going on, but at least he sees there's intelligent people. They look like they're cultured people. He sees here this professor, there's another guy, and they're all swooning over there. So he swoons also. He doesn't know what's going on, but he believes. I mean, he hears sounds, right? To him, everything is. He doesn't hear any music, any harmony, but he hears that there's something going on, and he sees everybody is going berserk. So he does it too. That's how we are with God. When we see that there's people, big tzaddikim, that they're genuinely, that's what's going to be the job of Moses here. That's what it means. Moses is going to buy for himself, purchase for himself a Jewish servant. He's going to make us into Jewish servants. We'll see. On this it says, Vahaya, Ba'ashem aleim yira. It says that God appeared to them. Which is not the case if this understanding of God is not close for Hashem, feeling benafsho, then it's called zera behema. There's some people that are thinking about God that automatically they feel God. They feel that the whole world is just this amazing, miraculous. The world becomes sort of transparent, and they can see that the reality behind it is infinitely more real. Now, don't think it means like that there's like there's a big man or something, and he's looking through this fishbowl, and we're in the fish, and he's just this big eye and God is like this marionette, the strings, and he's pulling all these strings and everything. God is not a person, he's not a man, even though it says that the God, we're created in God's image. But what does this mean? Like the soul, something like the soul. And the body is also corresponding to the soul, but the soul is corresponding to the spiritual worlds. The spiritual worlds, they're corresponding to this world of Atzilut, which that's pure godliness, and Atzilut is corresponding to worlds which are above Atzilut. But this is all part of the oneness of God, just different dimensions of the infiniteness of God. That's why all the angels are burning up and screaming, because they feel this. But if we don't feel it, then we're called the seed of animal. The angels are also to a certain degree called animals. Chayot HaKodesh. So we're talking about the ordinary, normal Jew, that even though he does have understanding and grasping in the greatness of God, the Gam Kol Yisrael and all the Jewish people, it says they are believers, the sons of believers, like I said before. Emunah, and this faith is above that. And we say faith is above even knowing and seeing. It could be that a person knows and sees God and he's not willing to give his life for God. They'll tie him up to the stake and say, bow down to this idol or we'll kill you. And it could be that he'll say, listen, I have thousands of pupils, and what's it going to do with the benefit if I'm going to get killed, and it's probably going to hurt. And I'll do a lot of other commandments, except for this one, except I have to give my life. And it could be that a person that doesn't feel God, and he's tied up to the stake, and they say, he says, Shema Yisrael, he's willing to give his life, even though he's a big professor or a big teacher or whatever. That's emunah is higher, faith is higher than this feeling. But nevertheless, this faith is just called a crown. Shu b'chinet makif, and it's surrounding. If he's tied up to the stake and they bring the idol and say, kiss this or we'll burn you at the stake, as he says, Shema Yisrael, and he dies. But in the middle of the week, it could be that he's walking and he's really hungry and he sees a nice shrimp. Could be that he'll eat it. Could be. Because then he doesn't feel godliness. So therefore, it has to be, if faith is not good enough, there has to be also this feeling. Like it says, you should know the God of your fathers. It's necessary that we feel God. Why is it so necessary? Because that's reality. By means of this feeling, by means of this, the world does not conceal at all. Even love, there's no comparison to it. Simply, if a person really feels God, then you feel how amazingly wondrous it is that I'm being created by God. I'm being created by God. My reality comes from God. A person starts to feel this. He starts to feel God is not just, my competition or something, this big religious character sitting in the skies or in the upper spheres. That God is really, that's also true, but God is also creating me infinitely close. He's more real than I. If there's anything that I love money, I love my family, I love my wife, my children, my friends, right? I love them. Well, infinitely more so, you should love God. Not that one excludes the other. Exactly the opposite. It becomes more meaningful. It says this feeling is essential to Judaism, even if it's only a little bit, even though we're just animals, but we're Jewish animals. And like I said before, with the sentence we said that from my flesh I know God, this is talking about Job. Job was not a Jew. So it's possible for everybody to come to this level, but a Jew has an obligation, he has a feeling. He has a inner connection. McCain, Yiran, also the same thing with fear. It's not similar hearing to seeing. When you hear about godliness, that's different than seeing godliness. So that's the job of Moses, is to get us to feel reality. What's really going on over here? That we are really creations and that God is infinitely good and infinitely real. Feeling. It's a terrible example to bring up, but there's people who, let's say, they're thieves. There's much worse than that, right? And they just don't feel that they're bad. They don't feel bad about stealing somebody's life savings. Or there's people that are even worse. There are people that are murderers. Here we just saw in just the last generation, right? Not only that, a whole entire nation just became murderers. Just made a big armies Japan and Germany and Italy, and they just attacked and they murdered people, and they just had no conscience about it. It just didn't make them feel bad at all. They just didn't feel anything. So we see how terrible it is, lack of feeling. When a person does not have feeling of something greater than himself, I mean, it can come to the worst things. There was, I don't know, like 100 million people died in World War II, something like that. Just incredible. And for absolutely no reason, just because people had no feeling. They just had no feeling, and so they were willing to. So the lack of feeling is a very terrible thing, and it brings the person down. Here we see like an animal, but here we're talking on a much higher level. But still, there is a person that doesn't have a feeling of something higher. He's like an animal. Now here we're talking about serving God. We're not talking about, God forbid, doing sins. Serving God. So serving God, it's very essential that a person has a feeling of God, because that's the fact. The fact is it's really real. Just like in real life, it's important that people have a feeling of what life is. You know, it's a big problem now in America, especially now. It's just very shocking. You know, there's what's called 7 Noahide commandments. These are 7 basic principles of life that all mankind has to follow. And they were really given to Moses on Mount Sinai also, but nevertheless, it's part of the world. It's part of the conscience of the world. Even a person never heard about Torah, Eskimo, or who knows what, they never heard there's such a thing as Torah. But people feel intrinsically, somehow or other, deep down, that it's not a good thing to kill. It's not a good thing to steal. And people feel it. Right? It's a deep feeling. That's what your conscience is based on. Your conscience can also be made crooked, right? In communist Russia in the time of Stalin, the person's conscience bothered him. If he saw that his parents had $50 or something hidden under the mattress, you weren't supposed to have any money. If the people, you felt your conscience bothered you if it didn't turn your parents in, to have them put into jail. Okay, your conscience can be made crooked, but generally speaking, that's the. So the feeling, a person has to have a feeling. This is so very important of what's real. Why? Because the fact is, it really is bad to kill. It really is bad, right? You can say God doesn't want it, nature doesn't want it, whatever it is, but it's a bad thing to kill. That's a whole philosophical question, with ethics, what is good, what is bad. According to Judaism, it's no problem whatsoever. The problem is doing it. But God on Mount Sinai gave laws and revealed what he wants, and God is the creator. The problem is, do we feel the creator or not? Or do we just feel ourselves? Now in the world, there's this terrible thing called abortions. Just doing abortions, encouraging abortions. Not that abortions are bad across this. Sometimes when abortions are permissible, sometimes when it's even it's a good thing to do an abortion. There's sometimes when it is. Right? That people have to decide, but that's not the point. But to encourage across the board that people should do abortions, right? It's a lack of feeling for life. So they make up an excuse. No, it's not really alive. It's just that's it. So that's the idea of feeling. Feeling. It's so important that people have feeling of the reality of values that are higher than what you see day and night. That we feel. And that's what's called, in Judaism, it's called to feel godliness, the source of all good. That's what's called the seed of man. And not to feel this, not to feel godliness, that's what's called the seed of Adam, the seed of animal. And that's going to be the job of Moses, is to encourage everyone to be a man. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Let's do a sikha of the Rebbe. I wonder where the other people are. Nobody heard.